Welcome to the newest episode of Use Your Head with Ethan Adler. Today we have two very important guests with us, and they will introduce themselves. Stephen?
Well, Ethan, thank you for having me today on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. So my name's Stephen, as I said, and I'm somewhat qualified for the topic of what we will be talking about today. So thank you for having me on, and you'll see why I'm qualified for the topic later on, I guess. Rieley?
I'm Rieley. I'm a debate coach for high school, and I also compete on a college policy debate team. And yeah,
That's pretty good. So what we're going to start with is the structural perpetuation of discrimination, as in how institutions like education, healthcare, the government, etc., perpetuate discrimination against women or transgenders or people who are of homosexual orientation. I believe Rieley has a lot to say about this, so we'll let her begin.
Yeah, I like to call it gendered violence because basically these structures are oppressing women whether they like it or not. Especially in the medical field, there are thousands of women every year that are sent home mid-heart attack just because the symptoms are not recognized because they're different from males. So examples like that, especially in education, a lot of girls are actually punished for being assaulted on school grounds because they were told they were engaging in sexual activities and were not supposed to, and so they were actually punished instead of being helped. So just instances like that where the structures honestly are not helpful for women.
Wait, Rieley, I have a question about the whole structural
Yeah.
discrimination. So I'm not too educated on this topic. It's actually the first time I've heard about this. But can you tell me what you mean about the symptoms are different for women and men? Is that an issue with society, or is that just an issue with genetics?
Yeah, so it's actually an issue with society because it is not recognized because male bodies and male anatomy is the default. So therefore, women's bodies are not studied in the same way and therefore go unrecognized.
So you're saying that no one studied women's bodies? Like you're saying there's been very little research done on this?
I'm saying that the research is obviously inadequate, otherwise women wouldn't be sent home mid-heart attack.
Okay.
How many women are sent home mid-heart attack?
I don't have an exact number, but I know that it's a couple hundred every year in the United States.
And this is because there aren't any examples and proof and what you
Yeah, how is this possible? Like, what are the differences in the symptoms?
So, it's pretty well known that men will obviously have, pain in their left arm, they'll feel like they're having a heart attack, but a lot of the times for women, they can actually feel like they have the flu. And that's the difference. And, it's not recognized. It's not well known.
So if it's not recognized, why doesn't the medical community make it recognized?
Because the patriarchy, Stephen. Honestly, a lot of things that women have to go through are unrecognized.
Wait, so when a woman experiences a heart attack, it's not the pain in the chest they talk about, it feels more flu-like?
Yeah, oftentimes, yeah. From the research I've done, that's what it is.
Huh. So that's very interesting and pretty much known. I don't even think most women know about that, do they?
No, I did not know till I did research about it.
Hey, Rieley, just another question. So you bring up the patriarchy, and I have a feeling we're going to be talking about the patriarchy a lot today.
Yes.
So is the patriarchy run by money? Is the financial incentive of the patriarchy there?
What sustains the patriarchy?
Basically. What's the what?
What sustains the patriarchy?
Honestly, I think the need for masculinity, it's a power-hungry thing. The reason that men are in power is because they are power-hungry, because they are raised believing that the only way to be masculine is if they have power over someone.
But what does this have to do with the medical community?
Because obviously, as you've seen, men have mostly been doctors because it's a powerful position. That's why girls are seen as nurses because, again, they are lower down on that hierarchy. So all of the examples of patriarchy show that they want power.
So you're claiming that men are power hungry, correct?
I'm saying that social stigmas force men to think that they have to have power in order to sustain their masculinity, which is a necessity, again, perpetuated by society.
Is money a very well. Is money needed to be powerful?
Why is money keep getting?
Yeah, why do you bring up
If you
money?
answer my question, I can go.
Okay,
into
why don't you answer the question, then we'll see what he has
I
to
guess
say.
sure, because money is a source of power. Yeah.
So if hundreds of women are being sent away, this is hundreds of women who are not paying the bills for their medical journey, I should say.
Journey. I don't think a heart attack I consider a journey,
Well,
but okay.
Maybe journey was the wrong word. But if hundreds of women are getting sent away, this is hundreds of patients and hundreds of thousands of dollars they're not getting. If male masculinity is such a huge, like, if that is such a huge reason why men become doctors, why would they turn away hundreds of patients when they can get thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars from these patients?
First of all, I think that they send them away because honestly they don't know that they're having a heart attack. I don't think people would necessarily be like, "Ooh, man, she's a girl, she's having a heart attack, I should probably not take care of her." And second of all, doesn't matter, they get all their money from robbing women for making them pay thousands of dollars for having a baby and continuing to reproduce for society.
Whoa.
Like, they get their money either way. Like,
how is the medical institution robbing women for having kids?
okay, so here's the thing is that women honestly are pathologized. We're seen as diseases. PMS is now a disease. Our normal cycles are seen as diseases and problems that need to be fixed, and therefore pharmaceutical companies and the medical field benefit from that by exploiting women's natural bodily functions.
So who buys these bodily function, like, who buys the pills and buys the pharmaceuticals to stop the PMSing, as you said, or to make it less painful? Women. So are women part of the patriarchy then?
No.
But if the women are the ones buying the pharmaceuticals,
They're funding the patriarchy then, aren't they?
So
there's no way to not unless we just refuse to buy anything ever. So you saying that we're just buying things to help the patriarchy is not a good argument because there's literally no way for us to survive
Rieley,
without benefiting
I'm
the
not
patriarchy.
trying to argue. I'm just trying to have an enlightened conversation. I'm trying to use my head.
Oh no, and I'm just informing you.
I feel like I'm not being very well informed, just argued with. I'm just trying to have a conversation about, like, life and problems, social
then what
problems.
am I not answering?
Well, you're not answering the questions I've asked about the feminism, not the feminism.
I feel like she's answered, like, your questions. Like, what's the question she hasn't answered?
The last one I just asked, I feel like the one about money. Women pay these pills, pay for the pills that help. So
just
how
the
is
pills
that an
then?
issue?
I think he's trying to narrow it down to just the pills.
So by buying pills to relieve pain, you're saying that we benefit the patriarchy.
That's not what I'm saying. That's what you're saying.
No.
I'm just trying to get around by what you're meaning.
I think we're both saying the same thing.
Okay, that's what I'm thinking too.
So you're in agreement?
I'm in agreement, yes, on some things, just not on all the things that have just been stated.
Okay.
Okay.
So let's push this a little deeper into the patriarchy itself, like outside of the medical field. Like, where else does this manifest itself in society?
Yeah, so I'm not as well informed outside of the medical field just because most of my research has been with the medical field. However, education is obviously a big example. Women just aren't really treated fairly a lot of the times in the education system and often are susceptible to being assaulted by fellow students or by teachers. And that's a pretty common occurrence.
What do you mean by this?
What do you mean?
Like, what do you mean?
She means
by
women
this?
are getting assaulted.
Yeah.
No, not the assaulted part. How about women are getting treated worse in education?
Yeah. So mainly what I'm referring to when I speak about education being unfair specifically is outside of the United States. I know we're trying to like kind of stay within the United States.
We can move outside the United States if you want.
I mean, girls in other countries, like when they have their cycle, they can't go to school. And that's a whole week every month that they can't go to school and they can't learn.
I've never heard of that before. Like, what do you mean?
Because they have to.
Does this happen?
Like a lot of the times in Africa, some Middle Eastern countries, they.
Is this because they don't have the medicine they need, or the?
Not the
No,
medicine.
it's cultural. It's cultural.
Yeah, and there's no way like they just can't go to school.
Why?
It's against their culture. It's against the culture of the Middle East and of many African countries to give women an education.
Yeah, and I mean, there's still places in the world where women can't get education.
So I think you'd agree then that we've made a lot of progress in the Western world, at least.
I would agree that
Definitely,
we've made
yes.
progress, but I still don't think feminism is something that should be completely disregarded yet.
Okay,
Of course not. We should never disregard the complete equality of all genders across the board.
Well, I don't necessarily even want equality.
What do you
equity.
mean?
I want equity.
What's the difference between equity
Equality
and
is equal completely in all things. However, I don't think that men need prenatal pills.
Well,
like,
of
that's
course,
the
and
thing,
women
like,
don't need
equity.
Viagra.
Yeah,
you know?
so that's what equity is.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
that's the
just
difference.
equal in what they need, pretty much, or
Somewhat.
okay. Thank you.
Okay.
What is the definition of feminism?
I think you know what it is if you want to pull it up. The theory of the political, economic, and social equality of the sexes.
Equality. So it's not equity, it's equality, and maybe I'm not the smartest, I'm not the best example or source of truth. I'm not claiming to be, because I'm not educated in much. But is that not the opposite of what you're standing for?
No, it's not the opposite, actually. Equality and equity are actually very similar. However, it is okay for me to want equity and the feminist movement to want equality.
Okay, for sure. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Okay, that's a good clarification to have. So, looking at the patriarchy itself, then, you believe it exists and that it's very strong. Maybe it's weaker in the Western world than it is in the less developed areas, but it's still a problem. So then, if it's existed for so long and perpetuated itself for so long, what's the solution?
I think it is people advocating for the rights of women, honestly. Like, I think it's bringing these things to light. The fact that I knew that women were sent home mid-heart attack, a lot of people don't know that. Like, they don't think it exists, so they see no purpose in the feminist movement.
Yeah.
However, if you bring these things to light, I think people will act
So,
on it.
so there's something here I think we need to clarify. So men aren't actively trying to oppress women, are they? It's more or less the structures have evolved in such a way that it leads to female oppression, but it's not actually perpetuated by males.
I think men, oftentimes, and even women, are purposefully ignorant, and I think that leads to oppression. Because if you are not aware of things that are going on, if you're not aware of those social issues, I think it's your fault that you're being ignorant about it.
So why would women be purposefully ignorant?
I don't know, honestly. Like, that's obviously not how I work.
White
It could be
privilege.
that. I do think white feminism is actually a terrible thing. And I don't think a lot of white women realize that them and their lack of advocating for women of color is very detrimental to the feminist movement.
Okay.
Not advocating? I'm not advocating.
Yeah,
Okay,
them not
thank you.
advocating. It's the failure of white women that hurts colored women.
Okay.
So you're making the claim then that women are sometimes ignorant of their own oppression. It makes sense. It makes sense why men would be.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to acknowledge that you're oppressing someone or putting them down or that you have these advantages. You want to believe that you've succeeded on your own merits. But it seems to make no sense that women would not acknowledge their own oppression. It seems like you'd want to. Like, wouldn't that make more sense? Because then you could rise up and fight against it.
Yeah, but from the literature that I read, usually like Bell Hooks and Audre Lorde have talked about this, that like Steven said, it's white supremacy. That's the problem with.
I didn't say white supremacy.
Yeah, you said white supremacy.
I said white privilege.
So white supremacy still. It's not just white privilege. You believe there's still these lingering effects of white supremacy?
For sure, yeah.
Okay, so can you delve into that and extend that out for me, please?
Honestly, like, there's a reason why black women get assaulted more than white women. Like, the numbers don't add up. It's the failure of white women to stand up for their colored sisters, honestly.
Wait, Rieley,
Like,
if we're looking at the numbers, not to cut you off, or anything, sorry,
you're fine.
but if we're looking at the numbers, don't if we're looking at like black women and getting assaulted more than anyone else, don't black on black crimes happen more than white on black or black on white?
Yeah.
So I'm not understanding.
So are you referring to assault as black on black?
I'm just black on black crimes in general, because the numbers.
Yeah, the numbers as well don't add up there, and I think it's because of white supremacy again.
How?
We have forced these people into what's the word I'm looking for? Cycles of poverty. It's hard to get out of those, honestly, and I think that culture perpetuates crime.
So is this actually a problem of racial discrimination, or is this just the extension of generational poverty? So the way I've always looked at this, and please correct me if I'm wrong, if you look back to slavery in the 1800s, which was ended with the Civil War, you freed the slaves, and many of these African Americans became impoverished and poor, and they got trapped in cycles of generational poverty, and these cycles of generational poverty have continued.
Yes.
But at the same time, more African Americans may be poor than Caucasian Americans. However, you shouldn't just solve for the problems of African Americans, you should solve for the problems of all of those mired by generational poverty, and that's the way I've looked at it.
Sure.
Or is there still some racial element to their oppression?
Yeah, I mean, I think cycles of poverty obviously should be addressed and not according to race. Like, poverty is a problem. However, I do think people are still racist, and I don't think they realize they are. Again, I think it's ignorance.
Can you give an example of this ignorant racism manifesting itself?
Yeah, it's because I think a lot of it is subconscious. Like, we don't realize the stereotypes that we automatically assume and attach to somebody when we see them.
Okay. So it's mainly cultural then.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's drive this a little farther then, because a lot of people take female oppression and racial oppression, and then they extend it into things like the wage gap. And they extend it into, structural violence itself and assault and rape being more prevalent among women. Could you extrapolate on your opinions about that?
On the wage gap specifically, starting? Okay. I mean, it exists. I don't know why people say it doesn't, because the numbers don't really lie. There's a wage gap. Women aren't paid as much as men for the same jobs.
Okay, so I have a counter informed opinion.
Sure.
Maybe not opinion. I have a counter to what you just said. So you're saying the wage gap does exist, because the numbers don't lie, right?
Yeah.
But when you look at all the statistics that find the wage gap, do you not do this, like the jobs, the statistics include all jobs,
No,
or is it just within?
No, so it's actually like counterpart jobs. So like for the same job, a woman is paid less than a man.
Why?
Because everything I've been explaining, women are not seen as equals yet.
Do they work the same hours? Because how? Wouldn't that not be legal if the women and the men do the same jobs?
Yeah, that's the problem.
It's legal to do that?
Kind of, yeah, because men are more likely to get promotions than women.
So
they're more likely to be in management positions.
So would you agree that capitalism is the economic platform the United States lives on, thrives on?
Yeah.
So under capitalism, isn't the goal of the life pretty much a business to get as much money as possible?
Yeah.
So if men cost more than women and women and men can do the same job, wouldn't it be economic and financially responsible and financially the right decision to hire more women than men?
Yeah, so here's the thing is that people aren't purposefully being like, these two people have the same job, I'm going to pay her 75 cents and the guy $1, right? That's not how it happens. It's that men are literally seen as worth more money. They are more valuable because that's how people see them. They don't see women as valuable as men.
So are we talking about the wage gap? Are we talking about careers and salary-based pays versus hourly
I don't
wages?
think it matters. It's the same either way.
It's the same. Would you agree that when under capitalism anyway, let's just talk under the United States for this example.
It is, so.
Yeah.
Would you agree that in the United States, at least, when you get a job, you are informed of how much money you will be making and the opportunities?
Yeah.
So if the women know what they're getting paid, why don't they argue for more?
Okay, so there's a few responses I have to that. First of all, women have in the past, and there was even a girl at Walmart who worked there for many years. All of the men around her ended up getting promoted, and she never did, and so she finally went to management. She's like, I need to get promoted. She ended up suing them and ended up losing. And second of all, I think the response is women are not taken seriously. Like, we're not. We're either, like, hysterical or we're being too aggressive. Like, that's the stereotype that's attached to women who put their foot down. And they can get fired for that. So I think that's why a lot of women don't stand up, because in the past, they have not won those cases.
So what's the solution?
If management doesn't promote a specific woman to management, is that because she's a woman, or is that because that particular person was just incapable of performing the job needed?
I'm sure there's examples of that. However, the fact that there are so many instances where this has happened, and overall you can see that the average is, like, that's the reality. Like, I don't think it's one instance. I think it's multiple. I think it's too many.
Can you give me another example just for my benefit?
I don't have any off the top of my head right now. No.
Okay.
Will you correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the wage gap is derived from the average of all the money women make and the average of all the money men make, not taking into consideration the 78 cents in the dollar wage gap, not taking into consideration career, not taking into consideration hours worked.
I'm sure there's numbers like that, but the research I've done is for counterpart jobs.
Okay.
And the numbers are still the same.
And so the numbers for counterpart jobs, so for a male pediatrician and a female pediatrician, the male pediatrician is making how much more per, like, how much is the woman making per dollar?
In the United States, I believe it's 76 cents per dollar a man makes. In Utah specifically, it is 70 cents on the dollar. So it's the worst in Utah compared to other states.
And that's for counterpart jobs.
Same job.
Not including hours worked.
No, it's like...
So is it including? So it's including hours worked then too? Because forgive me if I'm wrong, but aren't men more likely to work more hours? Is this not a trend?
Why are they more likely?
Why would men be more likely to? Well, I think you can stem this down to biological differences, can't you? Like, I think men are genetically, they have testosterone. I think that makes them more ambitious. And I think, as you said, culturally, men are more power hungry. Money is a vehicle to power. Meaning, if a man's looking for power, he's going to try to get more money. He's going to try to work more hours to make more money. Or is that not what's happening?
I do think men can be more power hungry, but that doesn't mean women can't be either. I think, like I am, I, like, seek success. Does that mean that I should be treated differently in the workforce? And I have been. So I've seen it in my everyday life. It's not like we work less hours all the time. Like, that's not a good excuse. I think again, that's just an excuse to pay women less money.
Like, can you extrapolate on how you've seen that in your own life?
Yeah. I've had jobs where only the men are promoted, honestly, and I have been laid off, but no men ever have. I'm not someone who, like, doesn't work hard. Like, I do debate and stuff. Like, I know how to do a job. I know how to get something done. But I am not seen as, like, some, like, big dude who, like, super wants success. And just because of that and, like, the vibe I get off, I guess, like, because I'm a girl, I don't know. Like, I just haven't gotten those promotions and things like that.
And you think this is purely because you're a female?
Absolutely. I get stereotyped all the time at work. All the time.
Okay, I just want to take it back to the pediatrician example Ethan brought up a few minutes ago.
Mm-hmm.
That was great, what was just said. I loved it. But so, the pediatrician, you're saying the wage gap exists because from same jobs? Does that take into account the same workplaces or different workplaces? Because wouldn't you agree one workplace can pay...
No, like counterpart jobs.
So the same
job,
business.
Same circumstance.
So the same business in the same location?
Sure, yeah. I don't know why that would really matter because men work at the same place as women do. So it's like
I'm just trying
job.
I bring this up because if, let's say you work at, let's just dumb this down a bit for my sake anyway. If you work at a McDonald's in Farmington, Utah, the base pay is like $11 an hour.
Okay.
But if you were to work a McDonald's in Seattle, the minimum wage is $15 an hour.
Sure.
I want to say.
Yeah.
The same job, but
Okay.
the wage discrepancy.
Okay, but is that overall going to affect the average that much?
Yeah, I would say so.
Not
$4.
really. It really
Why not?
won't, because there's 48 other states.
Yeah, in order for
So,
that to affect
like
the
a cent off, I don't
Yeah.
think that's really gonna matter.
in order for that to affect the average, more men would have to be working in Seattle than women, and more women would
Yeah,
would have
and
to
we're
work in the
spread
other
out
state.
evenly, so that doesn't really make sense.
Okay. Thanks
Yeah.
for clarifying that for me.
Yeah, no, it's perfectly fine.
Like I said, I'm not too educated on this topic.
Yeah, so women are getting paid less. You're saying purely because they're women, and you're saying there's no. Is there this conspiracy of males to pay women less, or is this entirely just this ingrained cultural thing that no one can really see?
I don't think it's something. I do think it's cultural, but I don't think it's something that people can't see. I think it's fairly obvious, but people just choose not to see it because they don't want to accept it. Again, like if I was a guy, I wouldn't want to like accept feminism. I really wouldn't. Like I don't
Okay.
want to be like, yeah, I'm oppressing girls, but I mean it's a reality, and it is a social thing, but it's a reality.
Got it. So, do you know? I'm taking you know women then who are not necessarily feminists and who believe women have achieved equality. Because I certainly know women who claim that women have achieved equality.
Yeah, I mean a few, like my mom, but like
Mom makes excellent pancakes.
yeah,
I
she
might
does.
add. I
She
might
does make
add.
good pancakes.
Very good pancakes.
Okay. So,
So.
so we have established that women. So, what you're trying to say then. So why? And I don't really want to use your mom as an example, but why would women like your mom not want to accept this? Because I feel like it's easy if you're a woman, and I think you see a lot of women doing this. You know, you accept victimhood. You know, you say, I've been a victim, I've been oppressed, and then that victimhood gives you a base to help push yourself up and break through these cycles of oppression. Especially with the feminism movement now, there are people you can join, there are people you can go through to for help. It's not like you'd be this lone person.
Yeah.
So why would you want to remain ignorant as a woman then? That's what I'm trying to figure out, because it seems to make no sense that females would try to remain ignorant, to actively sustain their own oppression.
To make less.
Yeah, I don't really necessarily know. I think that they just kind of live in denial and accept that all of the garbage out there that says we are, honestly, like, I don't really know. I don't understand it because obviously I don't agree with it.
Okay.
I'm really not sure why people don't agree with feminism.
I mean, so are they being sustained by the patriarchy then? Is that what's still keeping them oppressed? Are they trapping themselves within the patriarchy almost subconsciously?
I think both, yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to bring Stephen back into this.
Thank you. I've been kind of shunned out of the conversation for the past few minutes.
It's not our fault that you haven't participated.
No, it's perfectly fine. You could have, anytime you want to speak up, like, don't be scared to just pick up the silence and run with it, right?
Of course, of course.
So, talking about the patriarchy, I think you have some specific views on this.
I would say so, yes.
I don't think you believe that patriarchy exists, in sharp contrast to Rieley over here. Can you explain how you come to that conclusion?
So, my conclusion of why I don't think the wage gap exists, as Rieley says it does, and how countless other women claim it does, is because, well, the stats that the wage gap comes from, the evidence, the reports, the studies, all don't take into account the economical, like, where they live, the social factors of it. They don't take about where they live,
Okay.
the what?
Oh, but here's the problem: is that there's really no need for it because women are in the exact same place as men are.
Why is
So,
there no
like,
need
why would
to
that-
look into the
Because
factors?
there's just as many poor men as poor women.
How do you what do you mean?
Because it's half and half. You realize that, right? And people are usually married, and so, like, there's poor men and poor women. There's no need to take into account those things to look at an average.
I would say that there's by all means, or you need to look into the account. You need to look into the factors.
So are you saying like women are more poor than men?
That's not what I'm saying.
Then what are
if
you
I could
saying?
finish,
Sorry.
Rieley. No, not to. That came off really rude. I'm sorry, but like, what I'm trying to say is, we do need to look into the factors of where people live. If men in LA, very, very high quality place, very expensive place, so obviously they're gonna need to make more money because that's if the jobs don't pay high, then they can't afford to live there. So obviously they're gonna make more money. Versus people in Oklahoma, where the cost of living is substantially lower. We can't look at Oklahoma and then look at California and take these two very different places and then mush them together and expect to find differing results. You're going to find a wage gap between men, as you claim. If we look at the men in pediatrician places, in California, and then look at pediatricians in Oklahoma, they're going to be different. There's going to be a wage gap.
I understand.
So we need to look at the factors.
I have two responses to that, though. First of all, there's men and women in Oklahoma.
Of course.
And men and women in LA.
Of course.
So it's
Yeah, they're
still, like,
evenly
the same.
distributed across the country.
Yeah,
that
I
should
know.
make
That's
a
what I'm saying.
difference.
It's evenly distributed. Second of all, even if you look at states' individual numbers, the wage gap is still there. Like I said, in Utah, it's 70 cents on the dollar. It's even worse here.
Are there more men in the workforce than women in Utah?
Yeah, but there's 60% women. That's our population. There's more women than men here, and we still make less money.
But from the wage gap, if you just agreed with me that there are more men in the workforce in Utah, if we're looking at this demographic specifically, would
again counterpart jobs? That's the thing, is that this is only accounting for people in the workforce.
okay.
Yeah.
So at one business, a man will make more than a woman
Yes.
doing the same.
I think we've
job.
asked that question
Yes.
several times.
I mean, I don't. That goes back to the whole point what I brought up of how when you need to agree on the job you're gonna get for. If women don't want to.
And again, the stereotypes brought upon women. That
So
we're
if
not
women don't
taken
want to,
seriously.
if women don't want to get the jobs, get paid for the jobs that they're gonna do, why shouldn't they go somewhere else? Why don't they do just a complete boycott of the entire system? Take all, as you said, 60% of women in Utah, and then all that 60% of women who have a job, and then have them all stop working.
But that's why we were marching yesterday. Like, that's the point. That's what we're doing it for, is so we can still keep our jobs and not have to lose them, but we can actually stand up for what we believe in. That's what those are for.
Okay. The marching? That's what the marches are for?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Which goes back to the whole awareness thing, which I agree
Yeah.
on. We do need to make aware of these issues, but this goes back to the whole wage gap thing. But you guys aren't willing to listen to me,
So,
including
actually,
you, Ethan Adler.
Thanks. No, here actually, I think there is a divergence here because I've seen varying statistics. At least in the research I've done and the people I've talked to, there are people who have the same statistics you've brought up, women making less money within careers. But there are other statistics and other studies which show it's like 98 cents to the dollar when women and men are, a pediatrician female to a pediatrician male working the exact same hours. The woman's only making like 2 cents on the 2% less. And there are statistics and studies which seem to show that.
Okay,
And
are there any where it's equal?
Is there anywhere it's exactly equal? I'm not sure exactly. I mean, 2% isn't very much. It's still a difference. It's less of a difference. It's less of a difference.
It's still an issue, though.
Yeah.
But it needs to be 0%.
Exactly.
difference.
It's less than a difference of, the
is.
upwards of 20-30% we've been talking about. But I think there is a variance in the studies people have been seeing.
For sure.
And then extrapolating from that 2%, could we for the sake of argument assume 2% for now? Are you okay with that?
For the sake of argument, why yes?
Okay, I don't agree with it, but okay.
Okay. So it often comes up the idea, and I'd like to get both of your thoughts on this, because many people certainly believe that that's almost a deserved gap. So if women are making 2% less than men, there are people who say they deserve to make 2% less, and that's kind of hard to push at first. But when you consider that a woman is more likely to take maternal leave, that a woman is more likely to get pregnant and have a child, and when you take these factors into account, people say that this 2% is deserved. And I'm sure you disagree with that statement, Rieley. I'm not sure Steven's thoughts, but let's hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I think that's a sorry excuse to pay women less, honestly. And I still don't believe the 2%, but either way, I think that's ridiculous that just because we have a uterus and we happen to have that and like could end up having a child, first of all, doesn't mean we will, and second of all, doesn't mean that we should be punished for it.
Personally, like, this goes back to what I said a while ago about businesses wanting to make as much money as possible. If the wage gap was there and you could pay a woman 77 cents on the dollar, why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't businesses just hire only women if they can make so much more money? How much money would Apple make if they only hired women? How much more money would Microsoft make if they only hired women?
Okay, but like I said before, it's the value thing. Like, that's the difference.
But
they don't think that women have value in those fields, so they're not going to hire
how
them.
can you say that, though?
Because it's true.
How?
So
Has like a CEO gone out and say, I don't have
This has nothing to do with maternity leave.
No, we're not. I like swerved off the whole maternity leave. I'm talking about the whole wage
I know,
gap
but we
issue.
already talked about that.
It's all linked because Ethan linked it back. The whole big word extrapolation. I don't even know what that means. God help me.
okay, let's take okay, let's take this to a more specific example, okay? So
Am I just like an idiot or something?
no, you're fine. You're absolutely fine. So let's take a look at a specific company, Google.
Okay.
So Google's this large tech company that's actually been trying to hire more women.
Cool.
So recently, there was a man named James Damore who wrote something infamously known as the Google memo, which he was fired for.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Was he a white male?
He was a white male.
Okay, thank you. Which, as we've agreed, white males are so much better, right?
What?
Because that's the discussion.
Yeah, I think Steven's trying to set the
Okay.
I think Steven's trying to set the stage for something here. So, yes, James Damore was a white male, and Google tried to implement policies where they made men go through these trainings, where they were basically forced this idea of patriarchy down their throats. They were forced this idea of women are not equal down their throats, and they had to comply in order to remain with the company Google. And in fact, Google tried to instate this thing where they're trying to hire more women, and in fact, they started having quotas. Like, you had to have a certain percentage of women in each department in order for it to be equal. They were starting, meaning, it would be better to hire a woman than a man. James Damore wrote a memo criticizing this, saying that less women sought jobs in technological fields because they were biologically less predisposed to. And he was fired for writing that memo. So the real question then is, are there biological differences between men and women that keep women from seeking jobs in technological fields? James Damore's memo certainly had a lot of evidence, and Google fired him for it, which I think is rather interesting. What are your thoughts on the whole situation?
I do believe that there are obvious, biological differences. I mean, yeah, I get that. I'm not going to deny science. Obviously, yeah, okay, Steven. Obviously there are those differences, but I think it's stupid for us to use that as an excuse not to hire women, because I think that's what it has been in the past, is women aren't as good, so we probably shouldn't hire them, which is not true, because women can be just as good as men, even if they are not as likely to be interested in that field.
If we look at the movie that just came out, which is a true story, Hidden Figures, I want to say, about how the black women were the ones who pretty much made the moon trip happen. So yeah, we're not claiming that women are not good at science and science,
but less of them want to enter into fields of science. Sure. So is that then part of the problem? Is it culture which causes women not to want to enter into fields such as science, or is it biology that makes them more predisposed to take care of children and take jobs like teaching and nursing, where you have a more intimate relationship with your patients, etc.?
I think that's definitely all part of the nurture versus nature debate, and most people have come to the conclusion, it is both. That sure, women may be more what's the word I'm looking for?
Predisposed.
Yeah, to.
Oh,
yeah,
that's just the
I
word
was looking
Ethan
for
said,
another word,
so
but
I
that's
like
okay.
the word.
Like, more likely to go into fields where they, like, teaching
Yeah.
social work, things like that. But I think a lot of the reason there's such a huge gap is because we're raised thinking that that's what we should be doing.
Well, aren't there countries like Switzerland where they've tried to institute these policies of men and women being treated, being treated
Women.
exactly,
You still said
women.
woman.
Apologies to everyone if an A and an E are very hard to distinguish.
You're not. You just say women instead of woman.
I apologize.
It's okay. I forgive you.
Thank you. But, so aren't there countries like Switzerland where where they've tried to treat men and women exactly the same? And what's happened is they've ended up entering vastly different career fields despite the fact that the nurture has been near equitable.
Okay, so
doesn't that
they still continued
yeah
patterns we're seeing.
Exactly. So
yeah.
Doesn't that indicate a biological difference?
Yeah,
Perhaps
I still think there's a biological difference.
So
obviously.
maybe it's a biological difference in the careers they want to enter into as opposed to something perpetuated by culture.
I think it's still both. I still think there's an influence in the United States, but I also agree that we're biologically different. I think it's both.
Let's go back to the culture thing. Like, what's wrong with having a culture that we all abide by?
If it's oppressive towards
not
specific
oppressive,
people,
because how is a woman wanting
been.
to do what she wants to do oppressive?
Well, because that's not necessarily what our culture has been in the past. Like, when I was a kid, for example, I wanted to do karate super bad, but I didn't because it was a boy thing. Like, I honestly thought that's what it was. Because I was raised seeing only guys do karate. So I thought it was a guy thing. And that's the culture I'm talking about, because I'm not, like, super physically, like, want to fight people, but, like, at that age, the only reason I didn't go into karate is because I thought it was for boys.
Well,
that's the culture I'm talking about.
Okay, so, but, like dancing and stuff, there's so many more girls in dancing and cheer.
And I absolutely think that we should raise boys thinking that that's something they can do.
Thanks, Ethan, for the time again. Hopefully I'll be able to articulate my opinions a lot stronger this time around. So, transgenders, the community, I feel like it's an issue. The social outlash they get because they are people.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think it's an issue that it is normalized. Because personally, and not personally, scientifically, it's not real other than in your mind. And if you look at the statistics, in the past 5 years, transgender people have the numbers of it have shot up. And maybe that's because that more people are being accepted and they're empowered to come out. And there's no way, of course there's going to be people who are truly identify as an opposite gender. But then some other people, such as the child in the United Kingdom, which I'll touch back on, who is a transgender who's transitioned back and forth like three or four times, I want to say. So, which is not right. So let's talk about transgenders as a whole. So the gender dysphoria, scientifically, it's a mental disorder. The definition of it is when it's not a direct definition, but the gist of it, for people like me who are not very smart, God, I'm a dumbass. So, gender dysphoria is when you don't identify as your birth gender, okay? And sex, because Rieley says that sex and gender.
I'll explain later. Yeah.
Okay. Well, the LGBT community claims that sex and gender are unrelated, which I can get that.
They're just not the same thing.
I can get behind that. However, I'll touch back if Rieley chooses to expound upon that, extrapolate on that. So, gender dysphoria, it is a mental disorder. Until that can change, it's gonna be a mental disorder. just like ADHD or depression is. It's all a bunch of chemical imbalances in your head. And when you have ADHD or depression, you go get help, correct? You don't get help by ADHD of bouncing off the walls or not focusing or just doing whatever the hell you want, correct? And you don't get help from depression by
ADHD I think is a bit of an odd example. We don't really want to delve into that as much, but yeah, I'll agree with you as far as depression goes.
Well, I'm just bringing like ADHD. There's conspiracies
it's fine.
Around that, but I'll talk about. We're not talking about ADHD. That's for another podcast, Ethan.
Yeah.
So, it's a mental disorder just like those two, and you don't get help from depression by committing suicide. You get help by talking about it and by going to counselors and getting prescribed medicine to.
So we should treat gender dysphoria or transgender peoples in the same manner.
In similar manners, because you don't.
Well, not exactly the same.
You know what I mean. For the most part, yes, because you get help from depression not by giving into it, but by removing it. Okay, you can't. I feel like you can never
not removing it, but I would say
alleviating it.
Doing
that's a
something
better word.
Different.
Yes.
Because it's obviously not doing great things.
Of course not, because no one wants to be depressed, and it sucks. So
we need to treat transgender peoples in similar manner to those who are depressed, as in giving them treatment.
Giving them treatment, and not the treatment of permanently disfiguring them. Giving them irreversible hormones that will change their body and their entire lives forever.
Why is it then a problem? Because when you look at depression leads to suicide, it leads to sadness. Now maybe gender dysphoria is a mental disorder, but if you simply give the person an operation, why is that such a problem? Why is that problematic for the person or society as a whole?
Well, let's talk about the depression. When you have depression, people, just generalizing, so trigger warning, some people, when they cut themselves, self-harm, it makes them feel better, and they get over it for a few days. So you're saying switching genders or having this operation is equitable to cutting yourself? I would say so, yes. I've never thought of it that way, but I would say so, yes. Thanks for using equitable too. That's a new word I learned today. So I would say so though, yeah, because yes. Okay. I'd like to hear what Rieley has to say about this. Do you agree that gender dysphoria is a mental disorder not to be treated as such, or do you have other opinions?
Yeah, I have other opinions, actually. I see no need to change your gender because I believe in the eradication of gender roles. Therefore, if there are no gender roles or expectations, those who feel more feminine or masculine than their gender says that they should be don't feel a need to change their gender because genders are equal. So maybe I'm just putting words in your mouth, but are you saying that changing your gender physically and transitioning is an irrational No, I just think at some point it will become something that's unnecessary because people will not be judged on those anatomical differences.
So is it necessary now?
I don't know. I'm not someone that feels that way. I don't know. I can't speak for them.
So do you agree then with the American Psychiatric Association that gender dysphoria or transgenderism is a mental disorder, or are you merely undecided?
I'd have to say I'm undecided, especially because being homosexual used to be defined as a disorder, and I cannot agree with that. Rules change. Diagnosis. What is the word?
Diagnoses.
Don't ask me.
they change as well, so I really don't think I can have an opinion on that.
So, are you saying that because diagnoses... diagnoses can change, we need to discredit the entire organization, the medical community?
No, absolutely not. Because I've experienced other mental disorders and things like that, so I agree that they are. I agree that they are real. Mm-hmm. But this I have no experience with. Even I'm not close to anyone who is transgender, So I don't think it's my place to speak.
So are you claiming that if you are not transgender, you have no place to, like, make decisions for them at all?
No, I'm not saying that.
But so why do you say there's no place for you to speak at this time?
Because I don't know anyone who's transgender. I've never asked anyone. I mean, like, I do, but I don't have enough experience, I feel like, or research or knowledge on the topic to say my opinion is correct.
Well, I feel like no one's opinion can be indeed correct. Because
I don't think she wants to
No.
give her opinion because she feels uncomfortable giving an opinion if she doesn't have a lot of research to
Okay.
back it up.
Okay. I feel that.
So then, Stephen, in your opinion, how should we treat those suffering gender dysphoria?
I feel like we should treat it at the base of the problem.
And what's the base of the problem?
It's different for every person. It could be a trigger.
Okay, so do we... So
Trauma. I think it's honestly, childhood trauma and a lack of support.
So, like I said,
Okay,
like
so we
a
need to-
trigger, you know,
so we need to
and
take
what
these
triggered
people-
the issue.
we need to take these people to psychiatrists, then have these psychiatrists figure out what's triggering the issue.
And then fix it. And there's no one fix, but I
Yeah.
feel like the fix that
Okay, so
popular-
transgenderism is caused by trauma then, and the only way to fix it...
I wouldn't say trauma, but that could be a base root. I feel like all
Other
mental
other
disorders,
causes can also exist.
It's
okay.
it's all just chemical imbalances, or just imbalances in your thinking, or just
So we need to try possibly to create drugs which fix transgenderism?
possibly not drugs, because those already exist. Because according to the LGBT community, the drugs that fix transgenderism is hormones and estrogen and testosterone, which aren't drugs; those are hormones. However, when they're drugs when you artificially implant them in
Yeah.
members of the opposite sex / gender, whichever one we want to look at, whichever term we're using
Yeah.
today. Sex
So
or gender, I don't
should-
know.
So here's a deeper question. Should operations which cause people to switch genders be illegal?
I don't
wouldn't.
think it should be illegal, but I don't think anything should cover it unless they specifically have insurance for it or something like that.
Exactly.
Thank
So
you.
the government shouldn't pay for it,
I
but
don't
should still
think-
be legal.
Definitely
It's
not.
not the
Okay.
government's responsibility.
Oh, the government definitely shouldn't.
I would
pay for
say-
it.
It's not their place either
Yeah.
to say whether it's right or wrong. It's
Yeah.
a person's obligation to decide that for themselves.
Yeah.
I would say that myself personally, I'm very libertarian. Do what you want to do unless it affects other people.
Yeah.
So if you want to snip or whatever you need to do, inject whatever you got to do it. But that's not right, and nor should it be covered by anyone else other than yourself.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be protected by the law of saying, like, in the workplace, because
Yeah.
as an employer you have the right to hire who you want to hire, and there's going to be arguments against that. I know about blacks, whites, and the
Yeah.
civil rights
Yeah.
movement. However, most employers don't want someone mentally unstable, which is why depression, when you are seriously depressed, and you can't, when you're when you have crippling depression, not to
Yeah.
make a meme out of this, but if you have crippling depression, you can't get out of bed. No employer is going to keep you hired if you can't perform, and transgenders can't perform because, as I've stated, because it is indeed a mental disorder, and the employers should have the right to be able to hire who they want to hire. And this kind of went off topic about the whole transgender thing,
Yeah.
but so Ethan, carry us back, loop us back to the root of the discussion.
To transgenderism.
Where you want to take this
So-
topic?
So, actually, I sort of like what you talked about employers. And I want to come back to that a little bit later,
Okay.
though.
Let's take a note out of that so we don't forget.
Yeah, we'll come back to employers later. But I want to touch on something Rieley said because I feel like we've excluded her a bit from this. You mentioned a difference between sex and gender. Could you
Yeah.
expound upon that idea?
Thank you.
Because I think. Alright, so I think sex is obviously just like the organs you were born with, right? Your DNA.
So there are two sexes, male
And I
and female.
think gender is a social construct.
We've talked a lot about the problems here. We've talked about discrimination. We've talked about discrimination against females, against transgender people, against those of homosexual orientation. But something we haven't really touched on are the solutions. So the real question then is, how do we solve for this? How do we fix these issues of discrimination?
Well, Ethan, thanks for asking that question. I feel like it's a pretty simple question. It's a pretty simple answer, sorry. We just, as a society, need to be nicer. Like, as cringy as that sounds, we really do need to be nicer. And we need to listen to other people's opinions. Because you cannot thrive and you cannot learn if you never learn anything else. If you never listen to someone else's ideas or point of views. Because Rieley and I, we don't agree on much. We quite opposite sides of most arguments and most ideas. But I feel like, and Ethan also, I feel like we as a group have all learned
very
a lot
varying ideas, and we've learned a lot from each other.
And compromise on more than half of all the things we've talked about.
Yeah.
Which I think is amazing. And I wish everyone did that.
Yeah.
What do you think, Rieley?
Deliberation, I think, is one of the biggest ways to solve things. Also, I feel like debate, if that was a required class in high school and it was run well, and the reason being is that you get topics and you have to do both sides.
Yeah.
So whether you like it or not, you have to research both sides if you want to do well. So then that confirmation bias isn't always there because you're looking specifically for a side, and then you can make an educated decision based on all of your research instead of making a gut decision and just going with that.
Maybe not necessarily a debate class where you force people to compete, but at least a class where they learn both sides of an issue.
Critical thinking of some sort. I think there should be classes where you do talk about those issues. I do now that I'm in college, but I wish I would have done that more in high school.
Well, the reason that doesn't happen in high school is because parents hate it. Because if you're a conservative parent, you don't want your child to hear liberal ideas. And if you're a liberal parent, you don't want your child to hear these conservative ideas. Because you think it's, changing their minds, and you want your child to think like you do. And that's another huge problem.
I feel like, I don't know, man, maybe we don't have enough time to go into another discussion, but I feel like the whole party system and how we label and we bring on all these ideas on two sides, which there's no way that's possible, because you can't only have two opinions, for or against, or yes or no. There's always a yes, maybe, in some circumstances, no. There's so many it's such a gray area, and so if we just work together, if we don't have as George Washington intended it to be, if we don't have a two-party system or a party system at all, and like I said, we don't have time to go into any of that, but we should just work together to get better everything, and not attack people because we don't agree with them. It's disgusting to me when what's supposed to be a beautiful and amazing and a patriotic handoff of power is crowded with disgust and crowded with this president is terrible. And I'm not just talking about the latest president inauguration, Donald Trump. I'm talking about every single other president ever throughout history, all 45.
Just one side constantly attacks and the other constantly supports, and it creates a terrible dynamic.
It does.
Though it's, again, conformity. It's, again, the crowd mind, which so many intellectuals, since, I think, for millennia, have argued against, have railed against, is that crowd mentality. Because, and I think it's easy to understand, especially if you grow up in a really conservative or a really liberal state, where everyone around you has almost the exact same views. And it's easy to perpetuate this two-party system where so many people cluster together who think the same way and never get an opposing opinion. And it's so easy to shove the other side out. And that's why they're, like the class Rieley mentioned, that's a brilliant idea. But for the same reason of this clustering and this conformity, so many parents would rail against such a class. And that's a terrible toxicity upon society. It's a miasma which clouds our minds and ruins, I think, almost everything.
It does. So, Ethan, is it all right if I offer a challenge to the listeners today?
Oh, yes, please.
So, if you're listening to this podcast, and if you listen this far, I challenge you to take 10 minutes, 30 minutes, doesn't matter, a set amount of time each day to learn about something you didn't know about, to learn about the other side of what you think. If you are a pro-gun owner, learn about what's bad about that. If you are a pro pro animal hunter, learn what's bad about that. If you are against video games, learn what's wrong with them. Just look at the other side of the coin. I challenge you.
That's a very good point. So I believe that's all the time we have today. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Ethan, for having us. Thank you, Rieley.
And to all our listeners, don't believe anything we said today just because we said it. Do your own research, think for yourself, and like Stephen said, always remember to consider the other side. Thank you.